Man, the late 1400s were a time. It must have been nice to have an okay and stable economy. To be real though, Western Europe at this point was doing okay. They were over here recovering from the aftermath of the bubonic plague, which wiped out more people than they could possibly fathom, which, yes, I know was an entire century before this, but it still serves as a major factor in the development of these areas. Europe is getting back into the swing of things, with lots of technology benefiting them being developed. But a lot is about to change when we reach about 1492, when Columbus decides to venture out to America, following the theory that if the world is round, and if he continues sailing west, he should reach Eastern Asia, which was a very reasonable idea. He just didn't account for the fact that there was an entire continent his way to Asia. When Columbus did land in America, they discovered that it was a new land, and that idea of new land was very appealing to lots of settlers and explorers. This eventually led to the Spanish conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires, which was the largest in America at the time. This would bring beginnings to the Columbian exchange, or known as the biggest impact of exploration through the spread of disease, food, plants, animals, and very importantly, weed. But what makes the Columbian exchange so important? It's all based around these three very important exchanges, you could call it, I guess. They are the exchange of plants, animals, and diseases. This is sort of the trifecta of the Columbian exchange, as we see these exchange parts affect a major part of the development of both the Americas and Europe. We see sort of a mutual exchange occur between both the Americas and Europe at first, as the Americas provide Europe with an assortment of crops that are all calorically dense, which means they give more nutrients. And a prime example of this are potatoes, tomatoes, and corn. This is incredibly important, as this creates a huge surge in population in Europe, which in turn makes it a more prominent civilization. This is obviously possible because if you have more food that gives more nutrients, you can then eat less food to get those nutrients, allowing you to have more food for everyone else, or better known as surplus. Now, this doesn't mean that this was a one-sided relationship between Europe and America. There was a major European influence in America as European explorers began to bring animals and crops to America. Portugal at the time saw the new land as an opportunity to grow cash crops like sugar, coffee, and grapes for, obviously, wine. So Columbus took some with him to America in order to start growing these cash crops in the new land. Now, these crops weren't the only things that were transferred. There were also animals like horses, cattle, and pigs, which were a little complicated, but we'll get to that in a second. Horses were extremely beneficial for America, as they were essentially a new technology that had been introduced to them. They revolutionized the hunting factor for the natives, greatly increasing their mobility. Pigs, on the other hand, were a little more of a downside to America. They were almost like an invasive species to America, as Europeans didn't really control them, so therefore, they just went around and eventually ate all of the natives' crops. This allowed them to multiply really quickly and just made them a hassle in America. Overall, though, the exchange between Europe and America is generally going pretty well. That is until the Great Dying happens. So, you know how I said there were three things exchanged? Yeah, disease was probably one of the most significant, because diseases were a very big deal in this exchange, and in a bad way. So, while Columbus and other explorers are traversing through America, trade is going well, as both parties are generally benefiting from these exchanges. But that all changes when diseases are spread to America. These diseases all came from Europe, but the thing is that Europeans have already developed an immunity to these diseases, while America, on the other hand, has never experienced or dealt with these diseases before, and therefore have no immunities built for them. This would have some grave consequences, as this would lead to the decimation of the Native Americans, as almost 90% of them were wiped out by these diseases. Now, it might seem confusing on why none of the diseases from America made an impact on Europe. At face value, this makes no sense on why Europe wasn't affected at all. The root of the problem is actually within the animals that Europe domesticates. Animals like pigs, horses, and cattle can actually transfer diseases through people, and this exchange in turn makes diseases stronger as they go back and forth between animals and people. But if the general population is already immune to these diseases, then it does not matter. But when these diseases like smallpox, measles, and malaria are introduced to people that have never dealt with it or have any immunities, they are obviously going to be greatly affected by it. On the contrary, America only really domesticated dogs for hunting purposes, and dogs aren't really known for transferring diseases, meaning that America's diseases weren't that strong, which explains why the downsides of this disease exchange was really only prominent in America, and these diseases almost created the extinction of all natives. So we kind of see a contrast between America and Europe. Europe, who is having a large case of overpopulation due to the surplus of new nutrient-rich crops, and America, who is almost wiped out by new diseases introduced to them from Europe. This increase of Europeans and decrease in natives will set the stage for later events like the colonization of America and the Little Ice Age. So in the end, was the Columbian Exchange really beneficial for both parties? Obviously not really. America was put into ruin as 90% of their population was wiped out and the two biggest empires, the Aztecs and the Incas, had been conquered. These factors immediately outweigh any benefit that they may have gained from Europe, who flourished immensely from this interaction. So yeah, Europe really won this trade by a landslide, and now the stage is set for future events that are soon to come.